live in Berlin, and Berlin, as you know, has been divided for many years. And a couple of years ago, I got the chance to visit the sewage system of Berlin and go underneath the city, and I realized one of the biggest inventions of humanity is the shared sewage system. This infrastructure that we all share and we totally forget about. And even despite the Cold War, at the height of the Cold War, still the city had to share the sewage system. So it was one company running the sewage system despite, the height of conflict. So that just reminded me of how important it is to share infrastructure and how efficient it is and how much it helps people to have a better life.
When I first moved to Prague, where I'm from New York City, when I first moved to Prague a few years ago, working in the NGO sector, you sort of, you need to be pretty economically efficient. So I was sharing my apartment, like a lot of people. And I had a woman staying in my flat from, I think, South Korea one time. And this happened maybe like the fourth or fifth person I had in the flat. And she was interesting in that, she would follow me around the house, and sort of whenever I'd come out of her room, she'd sort of poke around the corner of the door frame and look at me from the room, and then she'd go back. And so there was this kind of social awkwardness in sharing with a stranger that I really grew uncomfortable with. And over the course of a couple days, this woman, I found her in the kitchen drinking out of the bottle of milk from the fridge. And I asked her why she would do such a thing, and if she could replace the milk. And then we had some conflicts one night when she came home, like on the second night she was there. It was late, and I picked up food on the way home and from work, and it was like maybe 10 or 10:30 at night. And I was eating a bowl of rice and meat, I think from like this Mexican place. And she came home and she asked me what I was eating, and I said, oh, this is like a Mexican burrito bowl. And she came in and she literally put her hand in the bowl and took food out of the bowl and ate it. And I looked at her and I was like, what are you doing? And she said, I just wanted to taste your food. And I think there's certain levels of sharing. I think the reason I tell this story is because sharing is not always comfortable, right? She has a different way of sharing than I had. And it was okay for her to taste my food with her bare hands and drink the milk, without asking and things like that. Which I think brings up an important point about sharing, in that it's not always comfortable, right? Sharing creates a lot of conflict. I think that's kind of a funny story, but I learned something about that. One, I didn't really love sharing my flat. I was doing it for an economic need and partially a social need to be less isolated. But two, I also needed to kind of adjust to the practices, cultural practices of others. So there's a lesson that was learned in that story.
It's definitely a need, If it were an option, we would all still have our toilet system all singular at home, and it would be super inefficient. It would be not good for the environment. So sharing is something that also in the long run is important for the survival of humanity.
Sharing is not an option. It really depends on how on what we're talking about in cities, of course. But in general, Matthias is right that sharing is one of humanity's oldest principles. We built cities because we wanted to come together and share knowledge and share resources. And the foundation of that, whether you're hunter-gatherer or you're living in a village or a big city, is to pool the resources and utilize the power of the community. In the United States, or in English language, we say it takes a village. And we say it takes a village because it takes kind of everyone's participation to arrive at a better solution, whether it's sharing knowledge or sharing practices. That's how innovation is sort of happening in cities, and that's how it's always happened. So I think that's right. The foundation of building a city or living in a city is about sharing, and it's about efficiency, and it's about the power of community. Now, you can also talk about the power of community being kind of commoditized in the current sort of vernacular or the current lexicon of sharing. This is talking about, let's say, the hot topics of sharing economy, which is part of where this project started on, is talking about how technology is influencing sharing in the city. And when you start talking about commoditizing the community, then you're getting away from the kind of foundational principles of what we think sharing is good for in cities, and how we can utilize each other and the knowledge between each other to make a better life. That's why we're all here, basically, in cities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can only agree. If everything were in the practice of sharing were commodified, and the sort of social qualities of sharing, which are really important in cities because you need to have this kind of social interaction, that is not just based on economic relationship, but it is based sort of on a joint cultural practice.
Yeah.
And that is also very important for the peace or social peace within cities that are, of course, by nature, since everything is so closely together, places of conflict. So you need to have these kind of moments of sharing, which are not necessarily sort of economic sharing, but also like socially sharing or cultural practices that are shared.